Blood pooling on the cold marble floor was my last memory before the darkness took me. My own family had orchestrated my murder for a trust fund. But fate is funny. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in hell. I was 5 years in the past, holding the pen that ruined my life. Dying is not a peaceful transition. It is violent, chaotic, and loud. The sound of my own ribs cracking as I tumbled down the sweeping 3-story staircase of the Kensington estate still echoed in my ears. At the bottom, paralyzed and choking on copper-tasting blood, I had looked up. Standing at the top of the landing, perfectly framed by the crystal chandelier, were the 2 people I had loved most in the world. Preston Harrington, my fiancé, was coldly adjusting his bespoke tie. Leaning against him, wearing a smirk that made my stomach heave, was my half-sister Victoria. "Don't take it personally, Leora." Preston's voice had drifted down, echoing off the mahogany walls. "You were just a stepping stone, a very naive, very wealthy stepping stone." Victoria had giggled a sharp, piercing sound. "Did you really think Dad wanted you around? You're just a ghost of his first marriage. He signed off on this, you know. The brakes on your car, the embezzlement frame-up. It was all his idea. My father, Jason Kensington. The man whose approval I had spent 25 years begging for, had signed my death warrant just to secure my mother's inheritance." My vision went black as a tear cut through the blood on my cheek. The betrayal burned hotter than my shattered spine. I closed my eyes, letting the void take me, swearing to whatever deities were listening that if I had one more chance, I would burn their entire empire to the ground. Then I gasped. Air flooded my lungs with agonizing force. I bolted upright, my hands clutching my chest. No blood, no shattered bones, no cold marble. I was sitting in a plush leather chair. The rich scent of roasted pheasant and expensive Bordeaux wine filled the room. Blinking against the sudden light, I looked around. I was in the formal dining room of the Kensington estate. Across the long mahogany table sat my father Jason, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, looking impatient. To his right was my stepmother Beatrice, wearing her signature fake maternal smile. And to my left sat Victoria, scrolling mindlessly on her phone. "Well, Leora, we don't have all night." My father's gruff voice snapped, pulling me from my shock. "Sign the document. The board needs this finalized by tomorrow morning." I looked down at my trembling hands. Beneath them lay a thick stack of legal papers. My eyes darted to the top of the page. Irrevocable transfer of maternal shares. I stopped breathing. The date on my phone, resting next to the papers, read October 14th, 2021. I had been reborn. I was exactly 5 years in the past. This was the night it all started. This was the night I willingly signed over the 30% stake in Kensington Global that my late mother had left me, believing my father's lie that the company was going under and he needed my shares to leverage a bailout. It was the night I traded my power for a crumb of his affection. After I signed this, I was sidelined, financially dependent, and entirely at their mercy, a mercy that culminated in my murder half a decade later. "Leora, darling," Beatrice cooed, reaching out to pat my hand. I flinched, pulling my arm back as if she were a snake. "Don't be difficult. Your father is under immense stress. You want to save the family legacy, don't you?" "The family legacy," I repeated, my voice raspy. I stared at the silver Mont Blanc pen resting on the contract. 5 minutes ago, or 5 years from now, that legacy had killed me. "Yes, exactly," Jason sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've explained this 3 times. The Asian markets are fluctuating. If you hold on to these shares, they'll lose all value anyway. By transferring them to my holding company, I can stabilize the stock. you'll still get your allowance. Allowance? He wanted to trade $1 billion legacy for a monthly stipend like a child. I picked up the pen. A collective breath of relief seemed to leave my family. Victoria finally looked up from her phone, a greedy glint in her eyes. Preston wasn't here tonight, but I knew he was waiting for the text confirming the deed was done. Instead of signing my name, I clicked the pen shut. I picked up the stack of papers, the crisp parchment, heavy in my hands. Then, with deliberate slowness, I ripped them in half. The sound of tearing paper was the loudest thing in the room. "What in God's name are you doing?" Jason roared, slamming his fists on the table. The wine glasses rattled. "I'm securing my legacy," I said, my voice shockingly calm. The panicked, desperate girl who wanted her daddy's love was dead at the bottom of a staircase. The woman sitting here was a ghost with nothing to lose. I stood up, pushing my chair back. "I'm not signing over my mother's shares. Not today, not ever." "You ungrateful little brat," Beatrice screeched, dropping her poised facade instantly. "After everything we've done for you, we housed you, fed you." "You housed me in my mother's house," I corrected, glaring her into silence. I turned my eyes to Victoria, who looked pale and confused. "And you, Victoria, can stop picking out the yacht you were going to buy with my dividends? It's not happening." Jason's face was a violent shade of purple. He stood towering over me, trying to use the physical intimidation that had always cowed me in the past. "If you walk out that door with those shares, you are no longer a Kensington. I will cut you off. You will have no access to the accounts, no cars, no credit cards. You will be dead to me." I looked him dead in the eye, remembering the sensation of my own ribs piercing my lungs. "I'm already dead to you, Jason. You just haven't planned the funeral yet." Leaving them in stunned, suffocating silence, I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. I marched up the grand staircase, avoiding looking down at the marble, and packed a single duffel bag with my clothes, my passport, and a framed photo of my mother. As I walked out the front door into the biting October rain, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind me, a strange sensation washed over me. I had absolutely nothing but the clothes on my back and a piece of paper that said I owned a third of a company my father controlled. But I had something they didn't. I had the next 5 years of the future mapped out perfectly in my head, and I was going to ruin them. The first 48 hours were a brutal crash course in reality. True to his word, Jason froze every bank account associated with my name. My black Amex was declined at a cheap motel in Brooklyn, forcing me to pawn a diamond tennis bracelet just to secure a dingy one-bedroom walk-up that smelled of stale cigarettes and damp brick. Sitting on a mattress with broken springs, I pulled out my laptop. I had 30% of Kensington Global, but holding those shares was useless if my father refused to declare dividends to starve me out. I needed liquid capital, and I needed it fast. I made a phone call. "Arthur Pendleton's office." A crisp voice answered. "Put me through to Mr. Pendleton. Tell him Leora Kensington is offering him the key to the Kensington boardroom." Arthur Pendleton was a ruthless venture capitalist, and my father's oldest, most bitter rival. In my past life, Arthur had aggressively tried to stage a hostile takeover of Kensington Global, but failed because he couldn't acquire enough shares. Within an hour I was sitting across from him in a dimly lit, absurdly expensive steakhouse in Manhattan. Arthur was a shrewd man in his 60s, his eyes like cold steel. He looked at my damp coat and the dark circles under my eyes with mild amusement. "Your father called me this morning," Arthur said, swirling his whiskey. "Told everyone in our circle that you had a mental breakdown. Said you were disowned and not to be trusted. Yet here you are. My father is a liar, Arthur, but you already know that." I slid the legal documents across the table. 30%, unrestricted voting rights. I'll sell them to you for $60 million. Arthur laughed, a dry, barking sound. Kensington stock is taking a hit right now. 30% isn't worth 60 million. Maybe 40. It's worth 60 to you. I leaned forward, matching his cold gaze. Because with this 30% plus the 12% you secretly acquired through your offshore shell companies over the last 2 years, you now hold the majority voting bloc. You can put your own people on the board. You can make my father sweat blood. Arthur stopped swirling his drink. The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by a sharp, predatory respect. He hadn't expected me to know about his shell companies. No one did. But I remembered the future financial leaks. 55 million, he counted smoothly. Wired to an account of your choosing by tomorrow morning, and I want it completely off the books for 6 months. Deal. The moment the money hit my newly established offshore account, I went to work. I didn't buy a penthouse or a sports car. I stayed in my damp Brooklyn apartment, living off instant ramen and cheap coffee. I was laying the foundation for an empire that would swallow my father's legacy whole. I registered an LLC in Delaware under a labyrinth of proxy names. I called it Novus Innovations. My next target was talent. In my previous life, a brilliant software engineer named David Carmichael had been fired by my father. David had developed a revolutionary AI-driven supply chain algorithm. Jason, too arrogant to understand the tech, mocked it, fired David, and buried the patent. 2 years later, a competitor replicated the idea and made billions. I tracked David down to a rundown internet cafe in Queens. He looked entirely defeated, nursing a black coffee and staring blankly at lines of code. "You're using the wrong neural network parameters for the logistical output," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. David blinked, startled. "Who are you?" "I'm the person who is going to fund your algorithm." I slid a non-disclosure agreement and an employment contract across the sticky table. "I know Jason Kensington fired you yesterday. I know he called your project a pipe dream. He's an idiot. I'll give you double your previous salary, a dedicated lab, and 5% equity in my new company to build it for me." David looked at the paper, then at me. "Why should I trust you?" "Because," I smiled, a cold, sharp thing. "We both want to see Kensington Global choke on its own arrogance." For the next 2 years, I worked like a machine. Novus Innovations operated completely in the shadows. I was a phantom CEO. Only David and a handful of top-tier executives, all poached from my father's competitors or cast aside by him, knew my true identity. We perfected the AI algorithm, expanding it beyond supply chains into mobile payment infrastructure and predictive market analysis. I traded the stock market aggressively with my remaining capital, using my knowledge of future trends, the crash of the crypto exchange in 2022, the boom of green energy in 2023, multiplying my 55 million into nearly 300 million. Through it all, the Kensington family thought I had vanished into the gutter. I found that out firsthand on a rainy Tuesday. I was rushing through the lobby of the Waldorf Astoria after a clandestine meeting with a banking CEO. I was wearing a simple black trench coat, my hair pulled back in a messy claw clip, carrying a stack of files. I accidentally bumped into a woman draped in chinchilla fur. "Watch where you're going, you." The woman stopped. It was Victoria. Standing next to her, looking as perfectly polished and hollow as ever, was Preston. Victoria's jaw dropped, and then a vicious, triumphant smirk spread across her face. Well, well, if it isn't the runaway heir. "Look at you, Leora. You look exhausted. Are you a courier now, delivering papers?" Preston looked me up and down, a flicker of pity crossing his eyes, a pity that disgusted me more than her malice. "Leora, we heard you sold your mother's shares for pennies to survive. If you're struggling, you could have called. I could have gotten you a job as a receptionist at my firm." I looked at them, Victoria clinging to the man who would have gladly helped cover up my murder, Preston offering me scraps while standing in suits paid for by my father's crumbling empire. "I'm doing just fine, Preston," I said, my voice eerily calm. Victoria scoffed. "You're pathetic. Daddy was right. You're nothing without the Kensington name. Enjoy carrying bags for a living." They swept past me, laughing loudly. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just watched them walk away. In my briefcase were the finalized contracts for a multi-billion-dollar government logistics contract. It was the exact contract Jason Kensington had spent the last 8 months desperately trying to win to save his failing company. Novus Innovations had just outbid him, and he had no idea the phantom CEO who just handed him his death sentence was his own daughter. 3 years had passed since that night in the rain. Novus Innovations was no longer a phantom entity operating out of a damp Brooklyn walk-up. It was a corporate leviathan. By 2026, we had systematically dismantled Kensington Global's core revenue streams. Our AI logistics network made their shipping fleet obsolete. Our predictive market software poached their top-tier hedge fund clients. They were bleeding capital from 1,000 invisible cuts, and Jason Kensington was suffocating under the pressure. Rumors of Kensington Global's imminent bankruptcy hit the financial presses on a humid Tuesday in August. The stock price entered a catastrophic freefall, plunging 40% in a single morning. Behind the scenes, my father was desperately trying to secure a bailout to cover up massive gaps in the company's pension funds, the exact same embezzlement scheme he had planned to pin on me in my previous life. With his options exhausted, Jason was forced to call an emergency board meeting. He was ready to sell the controlling stake of the company for pennies on the dollar to the only bidder left willing to assume his massive debts, Novus Innovations. He still had absolutely no idea who the CEO of Novus was. I had insisted on strict anonymity through proxy lawyers until the final signature was required. I chose my armor carefully for this day: a tailored razor-sharp crimson suit, a pair of black stiletto heels that sounded like a ticking clock on hardwood floors, and a simple diamond choker. No makeup to hide the hard, cold lines my face had developed over the last 5 years. My private car pulled up to the Kensington Global headquarters in Manhattan. Thunder rumbled overhead, vibrating through the sole of my shoes as I stepped onto the wet pavement. David, my chief technology officer, walked to my right. Arthur Pendleton, who had grown immensely wealthy by betting on my success, flanked my left. We took the private elevator to the 52nd floor. The air in the executive corridor smelled of ozone-stale coffee and raw panic. "They're all inside," Arthur murmured, checking his heavy gold watch. "Jason the board, and for some reason your sister and her fiancé. I suppose they wanted to watch the ship sink together." "Good," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I want an audience." I pushed the heavy oak double doors of the boardroom open. The heavy brass hinges groaned. The sprawling room fell dead silent. 15 board members, my father, Beatrice, Victoria, and Preston, all turned to look at the intrusion. Jason was at the head of the table, his skin an ashen, sickly grey. His tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, a physical testament to his failing empire. "What is the meaning of this?" Jason snapped, his voice cracking with exhaustion. He looked at Arthur, his old rival, with sheer hatred. "Pendleton, I should have known you were circling like a vulture. Who is this?" My assistant told me the CEO of Novus Innovations was arriving. I walked slowly down the length of the long mahogany table. My heels clicked rhythmically, dominating the silence. "She has arrived," I said. Victoria let out a sharp, derisive snort. "Leora, what are you doing here? Did Arthur hire you as his secretary?" "We are in the middle of a private high-level buyout. Security." Preston adjusted his tie, his handsome face twisting into a condescending grimace. "Leora, please. This is embarrassing. Don't make a scene. Just leave before you get arrested for trespassing." I ignored them both. I reached the end of the table, standing directly opposite my father. I placed a thick leather binder on the polished wood. "I am the founder majority shareholder and acting CEO of Novus Innovations," I stated, my voice ringing clear and absolute off the glass walls. "And I am here to buy the rotting carcass of your company." For 10 full seconds no one breathed. The only sound was the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Jason blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. You are Novus." "That's impossible. You're a child. You had nothing." "I had 30% of your stock, Jason," I corrected, leaning over the table, "which I sold to Arthur 5 years ago to fund my startup. I took your brightest engineers whom you fired out of sheer arrogance. I anticipated the market shifts you were too stubborn to see. I built the technology that made your entire infrastructure obsolete. I didn't just beat you. I engineered your extinction." Beatrice stood up, her face flushed with fury. "This is a trick. She's lying. She doesn't have the capital to authorize a buyout. She's just a spiteful, ungrateful little—" "Shut up, Beatrice," Arthur barked, tossing a certified bank ledger onto the table. "Novus Innovations has a liquid valuation of $4 billion. She has more than enough capital to buy you all 10 times over. Read the papers." Preston's arrogant smirk melted, entirely replaced by a pale, sick realization. He looked at the legal documents, then looked at me, seeing me truly for the first time. The girl he thought he could use and discard was standing over him with a financial guillotine. "Leora," Preston whispered, his voice trembling as his survival instincts kicked in. "You built Novus, my God. That's incredible. I always knew you were brilliant. Victoria never believed in you, but I did." Victoria whipped her head around to stare at her fiancé. "Preston, what the hell are you saying?" "I'm saying she won, Victoria," Preston hissed, backing away from her. He looked back at me, his eyes pleading. "Leora, listen to me. I was forced into this engagement. Jason promised me a partnership at his firm. But I can help you. I know all of Jason's offshore accounts. I can help you transition the assets." I laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound that made Preston flinch. "You think I need your help to find the offshore accounts, Preston?" I asked softly. "I'm not here to transition his assets. I'm here to burn them." I flipped open the leather binder on the table. Inside was not a buyout agreement, but hundreds of pages of financial forensics bank statements and encrypted emails. "You called this meeting to sell the company to save yourself from bankruptcy," I said, looking directly into my father's terrified eyes. "But bankruptcy isn't your biggest problem, Jason. Fraud is. Wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and the theft of nearly $80 million from the Kensington Global Employee Pension Fund." The board members erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor. Voices shouted in outrage and panic. "Lies!" Jason roared, slamming his fist on the table, though his hand shook violently. "Fabricated garbage, you can't prove a damn thing. I can," I replied, tapping the documents. "Because I routed the Novus AI system through your internal servers 3 weeks ago. I found the dummy corporations in the Cayman Islands. I found the emails between you and your chief financial officer orchestrating the transfer. I even found the draft of the forged documents you were going to use to frame me for the missing funds 5 years ago." Jason froze. The blood entirely left his face. He staggered backward, clutching his chest. In my past life, that frame-up was his masterstroke. He had siphoned the money to cover his terrible investments, and when the auditors came knocking, he pinned it on his naive daughter, destroying my reputation right before arranging my fatal accident. Exposing it now felt like pulling a poisoned arrow out of my own heart. I didn't just bring these documents for the board. I continued checking my watch. I sent copies to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and the New York District Attorney 2 hours ago. They are currently freezing every personal and corporate asset tied to your name. Right on cue, the wail of police sirens echoed from the busy streets, 50 stories below, growing rapidly louder. "No, no, no," Victoria whimpered, clutching her designer handbag to her chest as if it could protect her. "Daddy, tell her to stop. Tell her to make it go away. We'll lose the house. We'll lose everything." "We already have," Jason whispered, his legs giving out. He collapsed into his leather executive chair, looking like a broken, hollowed-out old man. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a pathetic, desperate plea. "Leora, please. I'm your father. My father died the night he planned to let me take the fall for his crimes," I said coldly. The heavy boardroom doors swung open again. 4 uniformed NYPD officers and 2 men in sharp suits stepped into the room. "Jason Kensington," one of the suits asked, flashing a badge. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement, securities fraud, and conspiracy. Stand up, please." Pandemonium broke out. Beatrice began sobbing hysterically as an officer approached her husband. Victoria screamed as an officer asked her to step away from the table. Preston, sweating profusely, tried to slip out the side door. "Officers!" I called out, my voice cutting through the chaos. "You might want to stop Preston Harrington as well. You'll find his signature as the authorizing notary on 3 of those fraudulent offshore transfers. He facilitated the money laundering." Preston froze his hand on the brass doorknob. He turned back his face, a mask of pure terror. "Leora, you bitch, you set me up." "I just let you hang yourself with your own greed, Preston," I replied smoothly. I stood in silence, watching the scene unfold. It was violently chaotic. The sound of metal handcuffs clicking around my father's wrists, the shrieks of my stepmother, the pathetic whimpers of the man who had once laughed as I lay dying at the bottom of a marble staircase. They were escorted out a parade of ruined, pathetic thieves. The remaining board members stared at me in terrified awe, waiting for my next command. "The buyout offer is rescinded," I announced to the silent room. "Kensington Global will declare bankruptcy by Friday. Novus Innovations will purchase your physical assets at auction next month for a fraction of the cost. Good day, gentlemen." I turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the ruins of my family's legacy behind me. When I reached the ground floor, the storm had broken. The heavy rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Manhattan washed clean and gleaming under the breaking afternoon sun. I took a deep breath of the crisp, rain-washed air. The crushing weight that had sat on my chest for 5 years, the phantom pain of shattered ribs, the bitter taste of betrayal, was finally gone. I hadn't just survived my second chance at life. I had conquered it. I slipped on my sunglasses, got into my waiting car, and drove away to build my own future. Did Leora's ruthless corporate revenge satisfy your craving for absolute justice? Or did she let them off too easy? This rebirth story proves that sometimes the best way to heal a broken heart is to completely dismantle the people who broke it. If you loved this dramatic tale of betrayal, power, and ultimate payback, Smash that like button, share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, high-stakes storytelling.